All right, welcome to, again, one of the three modules that we have today. And we're going to be covering a very exciting field of science, intelligent design. It's not mentioned very much. You're not going to read about it in the papers. You're not going to see it in the classrooms very often, but it is a edge-cutting field of science. It is coming forward. It is not going to be able to be stifled forever. And so I'd like to update you about some of the recent discoveries in the last 10 years. They have made tremendous progress in all fields, all the way from the macrocosmos to the microcosmos. And we're just going to go over and highlight some of the most important discoveries. As Psalms 111:2 says, the works of the Lord are great, studied by all who have pleasure in them. So here we're exhorted to study the works of God, and we certainly do have pleasure in them. So we're going to be covering the major fields, 4 major fields of intelligent design. And we have our little flagellum. It's still the symbol, it's the mascot of intelligent design because of its incredible function and design behind that bacterial flagellum. As you know, bacterium are just one-celled organisms, and they have to move around a fluid body. And so they use an outboard motor. Instead of a propeller, it has this whip-like flagellum at the end of it. But it is of enormous complexity, and it's all made out of proteins. Proteins are the workhorses of the cell, and they are molecular machine parts that come together. And so far they've found 5 million types of proteins. So just think, these are molecular components that act like Lego blocks, and you can build just about anything imaginable. And so you have, as an example, the bacterial flagellum. There are 4 main aspects or pillars of intelligent design. First one is information theory. Again, this was just discovered in the last 30 years or so. Biologist George C. Williams explained how information is separate from matter and energy. I still remember one of those mind-boggling moments when I was watching a scientist on a TV program. Must have been 25 years ago. And he said, information is different from matter and energy. And I did a double take. I said, what is this about? I always thought information is just part of what we have in nature, and it's just like everything else that is physical. And they said, no, what we have found is that information is separate from matter and energy. Now, just for a quiz question, what came first? Information or matter and energy? Anybody want to answer? Okay, matter and energy. So, can matter and energy create information? No. Information is needed to create matter and energy. Just like you have a computer system, but if you don't have the information to build it in the first place and to program it, the hardware is not going to create the information. And so it points to this superior intellect and mind who first conceived. And information is the outcome of the mind working and producing. So actually, it says in the beginning, God created universe and the earth and everything around it. And God used the information to put it into an orderly system. Examples, I have here a magazine. Now, it's made out of paper and ink. Now, I can squiggle all kinds of ink in it, and it might not have information. But if there is a mind behind it, you can use the ink to transfer and to give information. Now, anything that has energy and matter can be used as a medium. You can use a book, you can use a CD disc, and embed in it information. Indians used smoke signals. The information content is the same, whether you're using smoke signals or you're using CDs, because information is what is being transferred. And so this is an important concept, because how do you evolve information without a supreme being behind it? They don't have an explanation for the information found in the cells, in the genomes. And we're going to cover that in a minute here. See, DNA information, which is the equivalent of 3 billion letters long, contains a complete instruction manual on how to build, run, and reproduce the entire cell. It is the equivalent of 1,000 books, of 1,000 pages of information. Now, here's the evidence. You have this enormous amount of information, but you don't know who created it and for what purpose. So you just have the information as the evidence. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, said DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than anything we've ever designed. How could this information have evolved from matter and energy if you don't think there is a creator God? And so we have here a couple of examples of what we have as the DNA up above with its nucleotides. They come in pairs, and they make up genetic letters of information. Now, the genome itself is wound up in the nucleus just like ramen noodles, and they are constantly vibrating. So you have actually kind of strong-armed proteins that are bending the DNA genome back and forth, back and forth. Now, if you took this genome, which is one strand, actually, it's like having a double-stranded fishing line with information inside of it. If you took this whole genome and you stretched it out, it would be the size of a man, about 6 feet tall. And if you expanded it 1,000,000 times, to give you a little comparison, it would be about as thick as a ramen noodle if you multiplied it 1,000,000 times. And then it would basically be the equivalent of half the distance of the United States. That's how far it would go. This 6 feet now become this distance. And yet, when it's wound up this way, it is so elegantly designed that it's like fitting it inside of a house. All of this, like basically over 1,000 miles of this fishing line, and you can wind it all up and put it inside a house. And guess what? There are no knots or entanglements in it. That's why the third graph here. It really got my attention. It was in the March 2019 Scientific American article, Untangling the Genome. It was mind-boggling, astonishing what they discovered. And that is, if you've got this whole genome that is all wound up in this way, how is it that it doesn't get untangled? It's vibrating, it's moving, and yet it doesn't get entangled. Well, they discovered that just like in a fishing line, many times when you have multiple hooks, you will use loops. And you can bring in the fishing line, and with these loops, you're not going to entangle the fishing line. Well, the same way, the genome, now they know, is filled with 10,000 of these loops. And they're vibrating all of this genome, but they are vibrating in a designed pattern. It's not random. These scientists say it's like an elegant tango that's going on. And just to explain to you a little more, if this was one of the strands of the genome, how do they form the loops? Well, they find that they have protein rings that are called cohesin rings, and they are able to go back and forth on the strand of the genome. And when they meet a certain 20-letter, what they call a motif, like here in this green area, they stop. And then another ring will go and stop at another one of these 20-letter. It's like just like a traffic stop. The rings are flowing, and then here they stop, and then they join together. So you basically have a loop that is being formed in this genome. And these binding sites are the ones that when they're together, one is called the enhancer, the other one is called the promoter. It triggers genetic activity. It tells how the gene is supposed to act. And all of this is going on. It's just like railroad tracks with these rings going through, and they're going through thousands of nucleotide information that they are able to detect when they get to the stop sign. And then the other one, it might be 1 million nucleotides away, and it'll stop, and then it'll join together and give the information out. So if you think all of that was designed by evolution, you need to see a shrink. Continuing on, in 2005, a leading atheist and philosopher, Antony Flew, renounced atheism largely due to the information revolution spawned by the DNA findings that he couldn't refute. So he came up with this, and he says, well, I don't have an answer for all of these molecular machines that are automated. They all know what to do. And so he wrote the book, There Is a God. He used to write books, There Is No God. Now he wrote a famous book, There Is a God. Professor Werner Gitt, German information technology scientist, explains information theory is a whole new branch of science that has effectively destroyed the last underpinnings of evolution. I mean, this is like the checkmate. But, of course, it's going to take some time for this to percolate and filter through all the scientific community. Back 3 years ago, area of London, scientists got together because they were trying to come up with another alternative to Darwinian evolution. They said, well, this is not working. What are we going to do as a result? So here are the 6 deductions that Werner Gitt in his book, In the Beginning Was Information. He says, since the DNA code has all the essential characteristics of a language, there must have been a sender. DNA is the message. But if you find the message, if you find a telegram on the floor, and it's got all of this instruction written in it, you can deduce that didn't come from matter and energy and evolving. No, somebody wrote that up, and it was intended to be sent as transmitted information to be acted upon. Just like the Morse code and the telegraph. You have these different coded languages that we use all the time. And so nobody would think, well, here we got Morse code, and evolution can actually develop its own Morse code and be able to embed all this information inside the cell. Number 2, since the density and complexity of DNA information is millions of times greater than man's present technology, the sender must be supremely intelligent. So just from this telegram, 3 billion letters long, you can deduce this is not made by man or anything close to a man. It has to be a supremely intelligent being that created it. For instance, difference between an ant and a human. Well, we would be the ant. And the human would be like God. It'd be just so incredibly more intelligent. Number 3, since the sender must have stored the information in the DNA molecule and constructed the molecular biomachines to encode, decode, and run the cells, the sender must be purposeful and supremely powerful. He didn't do it just as a hobby or just as an accident. No, he had a purpose for this. And he must be supremely powerful to create all of this out of matter and energy. The 4th deduction. Since information is a non-material component and can't originate from matter or energy, the sender must have a non-material entity, what we call spirit and mind. So just from getting this information and knowing information cannot be derived from a rock, from soil, from lightning. No, it has to come from a being that has intelligence. And he must have a non-material component. Number 5, since information cannot originate from matter and is created by man, man's nature must have a non-material component. It must have spirit and mind. And number 6, since the biological information can only originate from an intelligent sender that has a mind that is supremely powerful, and all theories of chemical and biological evolution claim information comes solely from matter and energy. In other words, there's no sender. Then the theories of chemical and biological evolution are false. I have not found any scientist that has been able to refute these deductions. Continuing on, we go to the second of these pillars of intelligent design, irreducible complexity. An example of something being irreducibly complex is the bacterial flagellum with its 40 parts that is similar to an outboard motor going 100,000 RPMs. That means revolutions per minute. Take one part out and the whole system breaks down. Here our cars can go up to maybe 8,000 9,000 revolutions per minute. Well, here's one that goes 100,000, and guess what? It can stop on a quarter of a turn and reverse itself. You try to do that with one of your cars and going forward in the freeway and then put it in reverse. See if it's as good as this flagellum or not. You're going to destroy your whole gearbox. Another example are the gears of a plant hopper, which is of the grasshopper family. And what they found here are gears that spin at 50,000 teeth per second for an impressive instant 3-foot jump. So this is something that physically they could see these little bumps. Scientists didn't know what they were for until they really put them in an electron microscope and they saw the gears. Now it's only for a few instants that they're revolving that way, but it accumulates such energy that it can take a hop and jump 50 times its own size. So here, how do you explain gears made out of proteins that can spin at that rate without an intelligent designer? We have another example coming up. This is just a simple version of irreducibly complex design. An illustration is a mousetrap. It's only made out of 5 components. So you have here the first couple, platform. You have the hammer, the holding bar, you have the spring, and you have the catch. Now, if any of those are taken away, you're not going to catch a mouse. You can have 4 out of 5, you're still not going to. You need every one. So that means that every one of them, when originally designed and brought and created, they all had to be together. Just like human beings. We don't invent, 4-piece mouse traps and say, well, we forgot the spring. So go ahead and try to beat the mouse over the head with the platform. See how well that's going to work. It's not going to work unless all 5 components and complex living things are similarly built. Here's another one. This is another type of cell in our body, the cilia in our lungs. They are irreducibly complex. They are hair-like limbs that serve to move fluid over the cell's surface or to row single cells through a fluid. Epithelial cells lining our respiratory tract each have about 200 cilia that beat in synchrony to sweep mucus toward the throat for elimination. Again, all made out of smaller components of molecular machines. They all have to be attached. They all have to be together in the same rhythm. You can't build this piece by piece. Just like you can't build a car and say, well, I've built, it's got 2 pistons out of 4 and I'm still missing part of the camshaft, but I hope this thing is going to work. And that's where some of these evolutionists are wrong, where they talk about, well, half an eye is better than a whole eye. Well, if you only have half of it connected and it's still, he was saying, well, half an eye, I can see half. But they're fooling you. Because it's like half an engine is better than no engine. Well, if you don't have the pistons and the valves working, it's not going to work. It's the same way here. So we go to the third element, the anthropic principle. It comes from the word in Greek, anthropos, which means man-centered universe. Physical laws of the cosmos are finely tuned for life and especially for humans. The cosmos acts like a cradle for mankind. All conditions are optimum. It was first explained by cosmologist Brandon Carter in 1973. He found unrelated constants in physics have one strange thing in common. They are precisely the values you need if you want to have a universe capable of producing life. So this was another astounding discovery. The Biosphere 2 in Tucson, Arizona. Anybody been to Biosphere 2? Okay. Yeah. Paul has been there. And I went there on purpose because this is what man's version of trying to create an atmosphere like we have on the earth. And so they had this huge rubber, I would say membrane. It was as big as this room. And it had to be always moving back and forth to bring in the oxygen into the place. And they locked all the doors. They put about 8 people inside. It had trees, it had organisms, it had bees. And they were supposed to see how well and sufficient they could last. Well, it was a disaster. The bees died. Cockroaches multiplied. They started not having food. And so some of them would sneak out and grab something and go in without anybody telling. So it was a complete disaster. Now, we have this beautiful earth, and it's self-regulated. And so, again, it shows someone took a lot of time and effort to design the earth that we have. Astronomer Hugh Ross found that there are over 200 different conditions for life to exist. All are fine-tuned and work together. About the origin of the universe, there's new evidence that has come out. Main discoveries are over a century old. The first one that really got the attention of people was Einstein's theory of general relativity, which pointed to an expanding universe. Up to that time, most scientists thought that this was just an eternal universe. It's always been there. And that was convenient for them because they said, well, if it's always been there, we don't have to explain who brought it forth. And we don't have to explain that something had to come from nothing and that this has always existed, so it could evolve on its own. Well, Einstein found that no, the theory of relativity showed that it was an expanding universe. He didn't like that. He put what he called a fudge factor to make it look more static. And then in 1922, he visited Edwin Hubble, a little later than that, but Edwin Hubble up there in the Mount Wilson Observatory close to Pasadena, had the biggest telescope, 100-inch, and he saw that galaxies were all moving and spreading outward. And Einstein himself went and saw the evidence, and he said, I was wrong. The universe is expanding. And the important thing about that is that if it's expanding at a steady rate, then you can calculate and roll the film back, and you can get to a point in time when the universe was infinitely compact, and then after that, there's nothing before that. And so they found that there is this supernatural beginning that they have not been able to explain. They call it singularity. It's not really a Big Bang. That's a derogatory term used by Fred Hoyle, saying, then you're thinking about a Big Bang. But it's actually a stately expansion of the universe. Everything is designed. Just a beautiful ballet moving outward in space. The 200 physical conditions, all finely tuned, and most with less than 1% tolerance. You move that dial just 1% one way or the other, it affects everything, and everything starts breaking down. So we come to the fourth pillar, the design inference. It takes intelligence to distinguish what was built by erosion, wind and water and time from what was built by intelligent design. We talked about Mount Rushmore on the Sabbath. It's an example of something that can be inferred to have been intelligently designed and could never be built by chance and natural laws. In the science of inference, this is used in forensics, which is detective work, and archaeology. You can tell a difference between a rock and a ceramic sherd. And so it's the same way. You see in nature things that could come about in natural ways by erosion. When you look at Mount Rushmore, you might not know who did it, but you know somebody sculpted that. That was not produced by chance and time. So that takes us here, physicist Arno Penzias, also of Bell Labs in the U.S., made this incredible declaration. The best data that we have about the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the first 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. He used the design inference to come to that conclusion. Won a Nobel Prize in physics. And so you see how scientists are admitting the accuracy of the Bible. This is just recent. It's not even a year old. This discovery came out. There is a biological bottleneck that was found through the mitochondria DNA. And they took a segment of DNA in the mitochondria, which is a very stable gene. And they used this just like you'd use a tree ring to trace back the origins of creatures by neutral mutational rates. That means mutations that do no harm to the organism. And over time, with the copying, you're eventually going to have a mistake. Well, they basically just found one mistake in those 638 nucleotides. And so they started saying, well, guess what? Let's check 100,000 of the main organisms on Earth and see what their mitochondria DNA points to. Well, one nucleotide difference is what they found in over 90% of all ants, monkeys, fish, lizards, many of these creatures, hermit crabs. They said, these are just millions of years old. Well, they found the same origin. They traced it after 15 years' work, 5 million samples taken from them. The only they say 90% because the 10% that they also checked on are very primitive forms of lives, which don't give you as much of a makeup, but it's still indicating the same thing. For instance, you get maybe earthworms, or sponges or something like this, which they're invertebrates. But he said, we're not going to cherry pick and say all of them are that way, but they all indicate as a whole. And so they find that there's one biologist who said, look, that one change in the mitochondria actually is equivalent to about 6,000 years. And because they can fudge this mitochondria clock and everything, but it's indicating that there is an origin of man and the creatures that populate the earth currently, where they found them to have a bottleneck, which before that time they can't trace if they existed or not. And of course, this most probably points to the creation of Adam and Eve there in Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 onward that there was this creation, because you also have all the animals, whales, sharks. They've all been tested by this, and they all go back to the same origin, which is very recent time. Now, we know there are a bunch of fossils out there. Eventually, they'll check on that mitochondria, and the prediction is that they're going to be not from this present creation, because we have mammals, reptiles. We don't have those back in the time of the dinosaurs. So anyways, this is a recent study. And here are the conclusions. Concrete evidence of which theory is correct. The Linnaean classification, which is around 1750 when Carl Linnaeus classified all the creatures of his time. Darwin said Linnaeus was wrong. And actually, there should be a blending as creatures evolve from one to the other. Here are these evolutionists saying the results point clearly to Linnaeus, the Linnaeus classification, and against Darwinian evolution. And this is the conclusion. If individuals are like stars, species are like galaxies with nothing in between. There are no intermediate types. They did not find how things evolved from one creature. They're all classified within specific groups. Evolutionists, they say, have to explain these results that go against their theory. The head of the study, Mark Stockel, remarked, "I fought against the conclusions as hard as I could," because he's an evolutionist. So this is still preliminary information as they come, but it certainly is very indicative of what we have taught. Michael Denton, in his book, Evolution, A Theory Still in Crisis, he says, "I argued that the taxa, or classes of animals, are analogous to distinct geometric figures such as triangles or quadrilaterals, which cannot be approached via little successive steps. Such archetypal forms, which are called homologs, can have bilateral. Bilateral is when, like a human being, you can split them in half, and they are mirror images. That's bilateral. But then you have radials, like the sunflower you see there. It can be split into 4 parts, and they're all similar. And I'm going to go ahead and give this to Ken Martin to pass out, because what we're saying is that these species have archetypal forms of which there's a variety, but they all stay with that basic form. So here's one basic form you have, which is the Fibonacci spiral in pine cones. I'm going to explain that for a minute. And also, here's another Fibonacci spiral, which is based on geometry of a snail. The Fibonacci spiral it came from Fibonacci, a mathematician of the 12th century, and he basically came up with these figures, his Fibonacci numerals. You always add the sum of the previous numbers. So you have 1, 2, and then you have 3. And so 3 you add to 2 is 5. You add 5 to 3, 8. And then you go from 8 plus 5 to 13. If you divide the front number to the previous one, you get the golden ratio in nature, 1.6.1, which all of these spirals are based on that geometric formula. And you see it throughout nature. And so here's another proof by inference that someone there had a mathematical explanation. Einstein famously said one time, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. What he's talking about is mathematically comprehensible. And we see it with the design of the creatures. So, moving on, the way science should be explained is using intelligent design as its basis. This is not anti-science. This is pro-science. But as long as you have evolution, that is, like one person said, wandering in a blind alley for 150 years. You're not going to get anywhere. What you need to do is use intelligent design like we use for reverse engineering, which is taking the components apart, studying them, seeing how we can design similar machines, and also, like with diseases, being able to use this pattern of reverse engineering. So, let's see. Let's go forward here. This is the last, which I want to explain, which is part of this intelligent design. Let's raise it up a little higher volume, if we can.
Elegant machines, superbly crafted for life in the sky.
This is called How a Bird is Born.
Regardless of species, the biological systems required for flight are the product of an extraordinary chain of events. And since Aristotle, science has worked to unlock the mysteries of a bird's development from egg to avian wonder. This intricate process is perhaps best revealed through the study of a chicken embryo, a complex organism that takes shape soon after fertilization as individual cells multiply within a protective shell.
In the early hours, you see the foundation for this organism that's coming later on being laid down. You see the front and the back and the top and the bottom and all of those things being worked out in this cascade of events.
Where's the head going to be? Where's the tail going to be? What's right? What's left? What's front versus back? Already these major axes are being established. And as these cells are moving and heading towards the places in the embryo where they're going to develop, they're also changing what they're going to do eventually. They're committing themselves, in most cases, irreversibly to particular functional roles.
On day 2, the bird's spinal cord, ears, and eyes take shape. Its vascular and circulatory systems are established, and its heart beats for the first time. At hour 46, the head of the embryo starts to arch into the fetal position. Throughout the second day, a network of blood vessels branches from the embryo into the yolk. They will transport vital nutrients back to the growing organism.
You got to pay attention to the details. You have genes being switched on and off, interaction, cell communication. It's an elaborate dance. It's like a ballet taking place on a stage with thousands of cast members, all of them doing everything they're supposed to on cue, in the right order, in the right sequence, in the right time. The process itself is so amazing. It transcends anything we know.
With the groundwork of major systems and organs now in place, the next 19 days are devoted to the completion of their development.
So you've gone from that one cell that can become anything. And 21 days, billions of different cells doing hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of tasks in the organism. The speed, the efficiency, the elegance of the whole process. What you're seeing is a mechanism at work. Information being translated into a physical product at each step along the way. Machines doing jobs. It's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Okay, I'm going to go back just to conclude with one slide. So, conclusions. Biology and genetics would be greatly advanced, and many of the discoveries would be more rapidly made by applying reverse engineering, the tracing backwards of all the design stages of living things. Then one could understand when and why a design flaw appears and compare it to the template or master copy would be therefore be easier to correct any mistake but it would also take humility to admit we can't match the Creator's marvelous engineering designs and can only learn and use them to advance our own designs for the betterment of mankind. As the Bible says, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. And also, only the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. God said, He has the very hairs on our head counted, and He deeply cares for us. We can see by all the effort He has made in creating all of this. So don't ever doubt God's love for every one of us. Okay, so with that, seminar's over.